audiens yang hadir tadi banyak bertanya dan punya interest yang tinggi mengenai kelistrikan untuk kepulauan. Dan memang mereka pengen tahu sebenarnya di mana batu sandungnya mengapa listrik kepulauan belum bisa berkembang secara sempurna di Indonesia.
Sini kan banyak pertemuan konsultan mechanical electrical, jadinya pertemuannya di sini sih lebih dominan, lebih ke ketemu dari sisi-sisi konsultan sama lihat dari tim-tim yang biasa berperang di proyek sih, lebih ke situ sih sebenarnya.
Usually we get to meet about 80% of local visitors and about 20% of international visitors.
Tempat meeting point yang sangat bagus karena customer kami yang lama akan muncul yang kita nggak tahu dan sangat efisien daripada keliling Jakarta temu customer satu persatu.
It's also the opportunity to discover new leads, to talk to people that we usually don't talk, and to showcase our solution.
Kemudian mungkin di masa depan bisa saya gunakan sebagai alternatif dari komponen-komponen yang selama ini saya gunakan. Jadi biar komponennya nggak itu mulu kali ya.
Kita ikut di event elektrik Indonesia, terutama yang diselenggarakan oleh Pamerindo, kurang lebih hampir 7 kali sejak berdirinya CIN di Indonesia tahun 2005.
Sebenarnya agak menyesal sih kenapa nggak dari tanggal 11, karena emang seru dan dapat banyak vendor baru yang mungkin nanti bakal bisa lebih kompetitif dengan vendor yang selama ini kita gunakan.
Banyak sekali informasi dan teknologi yang sangat pesat sekali yang membuat saya wow gitu kan, dan luar biasa sekali. Dan
banyak produk-produk yang lain yang kita bisa tahu 2 tahun lalu nggak muncul, sekarang muncul apa aja. Dan kita bisa lihat kompetitor perkembangannya, produk-produk kita yang dulu Schneider nggak ada, sekarang sudah ada. Nah, ya ini buat refresh kita untuk kedepannya itu ngapain.
Keep it up and see you in 2 years.
audiens yang hadir tadi banyak bertanya dan punya interest yang tinggi mengenai kelistrikan untuk kepulauan. Dan memang mereka pengen tahu sebenarnya di mana batu sandungnya mengapa listrik kepulauan belum bisa berkembang secara sempurna di Indonesia.
Sini kan banyak pertemuan konsultan mechanical electrical, jadinya pertemuannya di sini sih lebih dominan, lebih ke ketemu dari sisi-sisi konsultan sama lihat dari tim-tim yang biasa berperang di proyek sih, lebih ke situ sih sebenarnya.
Usually we get to meet about 80% of local visitors and about 20% of international visitors.
Tempat meeting point yang sangat bagus karena customer-customer kami yang lama akan muncul yang kita nggak tahu dan sangat efisien daripada keliling Jakarta temu customer satu persatu.
It's also the opportunity to discover new leads, to talk to people that we usually don't talk, and to showcase our solution.
Kemudian mungkin di masa depan bisa saya gunakan sebagai alternatif dari komponen-komponen yang selama ini saya gunakan. Jadi biar komponennya nggak itu mulu kali ya.
Kita ikut di event elektrik Indonesia, terutama yang diselenggarakan oleh Pamerindo, kurang lebih hampir 7 kali sejak berdirinya CIN di Indonesia tahun 2005.
Sebenarnya agak menyesal sih kenapa nggak dari tanggal 11, karena emang seru dan dapat banyak vendor baru yang mungkin nanti bakal bisa lebih kompetitif dengan vendor yang selama ini kita gunakan.
Banyak sekali informasi dan teknologi yang sangat pesat sekali yang membuat saya wow gitu kan, dan luar biasa sekali. Dan
banyak produk-produk yang lain yang kita bisa tahu 2 tahun lalu nggak muncul, sekarang muncul apa aja. Dan kita bisa lihat kompetitor perkembangannya, produk-produk kita yang dulu Schneider nggak ada, sekarang sudah ada. Nah, ya ini buat refresh kita untuk kedepannya itu ngapain.
Keep it up and see you in 2 years.
Good morning, good afternoon, selamat siang, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to today's webinar EnergyTalk 7 series. This webinar is part of Electric and Power Indonesia. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. May peace be upon you. Welcome to Mr. Edi Widiono. He is founder of Supervisory Board, Indonesia Smart Grid Initiative, or PZCI. And keynote speaker for today, Dr. Insinyur Dadan Kusdiana MSc, as a Director General of New Renewable Energy and Conservation of Indonesia. Our special topic for today's webinar is overview of sustainable energy financing, challenges and opportunities. This webinar fully organized by Indonesia Smart Grid Initiative, or PZCI, along with Pemerindo Indonesia, and broadcast via Zoom webinar. We have just a few announcements before we begin for general housekeeping. Host will mute your audio and camera. Today's session will be recorded, and we will share the recorded session 2 days after the webinar. Q&A session. Use Q&A button to type your question. Mention to which speaker your question is for. But you can access recorded session, presentation slide, e-certificate 5 to 7 days after the webinar, and submit your inquiries to ijeng@pemerindo.com. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to listen to the opening speech delivered by founder of Supervisory Board, Indonesia Smart Grid Initiative, or PZCI. Ladies and gentlemen, Please welcome Mr. Edi Widyono.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me begin by expressing warm welcome to all of you to the PJCI Pamerindo webinar on the discussion with the topic of sustainability energy financing overviews, challenges, and opportunities. I would like to also express my sincere gratitude to Dr. Insinyur Dadan Kusdiana, MSc, the Director General for New Renewable Energy and Energy Conservation, Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. And to the honorable speakers, Ms. Melissa Brown, the IAFA Director, Energy Finance Studies, Asia, Mr. Florian Kitt, the Energy Specialist of Asian Development Bank, and Mr. I. Ketut Alam Wangsa Wijaya, the EVP Transaction Banking and Business Development PT BCA. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, there are arguments put forward by many sources that the challenge of renewable energy is not on its way. Even achieving the 20% renewable energy target by 2025 is now considered very difficult to achieve. Actually, support of good Indonesian government financial management is one of the prerequisites to reach and resolve Indonesian renewable energy target, that is 23% on 2035. The Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources stated that it needed $36.95 billion investment to achieve this target. In 2020, an investment of $2 billion was expected. However, the trend in 2021 shows that the investment target was under threat due to the low attractiveness in renewable energy investment in Indonesia and the COVID-19 pandemic conditions, which make it more difficult to build new power plant projects. Attracting investors shouldn't be a problem. Investment can occur when an investor sees that the field can generate profit. Then why is it difficult to finance the EBT generation sector? Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that this discussion will raise contribution and innovation to us who care and want to pursue their target to create clean energy by finding the best practical ways and means to achieve the investment and target. In conclusion, I would like to appreciate the official of Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources to attend this webinar, and thank you for speakers and Pamerindo Electrical Power Indonesia for successing the seminar in cooperation with PJC. At the same time, my sincere appreciation goes to the attendees that have joined contribution to this webinar. I hope you enjoy the discussion, stay healthy and safety. Sobat PJC, salam energi. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Mr. Edi Widyono, for the opening speech. Ladies and gentlemen, now we are going to listen to the opening speech delivered by Director General of New Renewable Energy and Conservation, Republic of Indonesia, Dr. Insinyur Dadan Kusdiana, MSc. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Insinyur Dadan Kusdiana, MSc.
Baik, terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang, very good afternoon, very good morning probably for those who are in Europe. So thank you for the invitation to us, to the DG of Renewable Energy and Energy Conservation. We are very delightful to have this kind of the series of talk. So I would like to appreciate first to Pak Edi Widyono, the founder and also the chairman for the PGCI, and also to other speakers, Ms. Melissa Brown from IEFA, and also to the Mr. Florian Kitt from ADB. Thank you for this kind of opportunity. To Pak Anton also, So I really enjoyed the discussion between the PGCI. I had several times discussion with the team of Pak Anton and also Pak Edi. So many input to us, many initiatives that currently are being in follow up here in the ministry and also with other institutions. For example, PGCI also is in the process in promoting the power wheeling. This is also again one of the aspects that to support the renewable energy implementation. And the other are the initiative of the solar park, smart grid, and also last but not least, I think in terms of the energy efficiency. So thank you again for the support. I would like to share with the slide. So I will share some slide to you. The organizer asked me to share the target of new renewable energy, the challenges, and also the opportunities. So I have some slide here with the first slide is on the achievement of the renewable energy so far in 2020. We have some series of the data here from 2015. So 5 years ago, the share of renewable energy is 5%. And now it is more than double within 5 or 6 years. This now is 11.3%. This is our calculation here in the ministry, coming from mainly from bioenergy because the use of the biofuel. We start the implementation of B30 last year in 2020. So that's why we could increase the share of the mix here in the energy sector here. The other are from geothermal. Geothermal is steadily increasing from time to time in terms of the percentage, in terms of the also the capacity, and others work from hydro. I think solar and wind also has been in on-grid within last 2 years. So from this graph, as also mentioned by Pak Edi previously, that we need an acceleration program to achieve the 23%. Yeah. Currently, we are almost 10 megawatt in terms of electricity, and around 80% are connected into the grid. So we need something breakthrough. In addition, also the other condition is that the national electricity condition currently is in the form of the excess supply. We know that the situation happened because of the pandemic. There is a reduction in the growth. So growth has contracted almost minus 1% compared to the 2019. And also the other reason is because of our forecast. Our forecast is likely miss with the one that we are now facing in terms of the growth of the energy, in particular the growth of electricity. So that's why we have the excess supply for electricity. So this is also the other condition. This is also the other challenges. It adds more challenges for us for renewable energy to be put into the grid, to be put in the primary energy mix. Next. So I mentioned already that the installed capacity is 10.5 gigawatt. This is about 2.5% compared to the potential, which is more than 400 gigawatt coming from geothermal, bioenergy, wind, hydro, solar. Yes, we have also the potential from ocean, but with current technology, I think it still has the potential. We don't have any commercial project yet for the ocean, rather than we are doing some activities in terms of research. We do some feasibility studies for the ocean energy. Geothermal, I think the growth is quite good. And bioenergy is almost 2 gigawatt. almost 6% coming from bioenergy here. So in total, we are already 10.5, and it's not all goes to the grid of PLN. Almost, I think the number is around 1,700 megawatt of electricity coming from bioenergy. It is from the off-grid. It's used directly by the private as the own use for the production in the industry, in particular in the pulp and paper industry, and also in the refinery of the CPO. So the others, so around almost 9 gigawatt. This is in terms of the on-grid implementation. Next. It's still increasing in terms of the additional capacity on the electricity coming from renewable energy. And we are targeting this year to have even more. We are targeting to have almost 1 gigawatt in 2021. It will be from hydro, from geothermal, almost 200 megawatt, from bioenergy, 13 megawatt, and from photovoltaic. This will be in the form of the on-grid implementation and also from the, we call it the rooftop program. So those combined together is almost 1 gigawatt in 2021. So we do facilitation. We are coordinating with other ministries. Some regulations are still challenges to us to be aligned. For example, the regulation of the water resources. We cannot use water in the conservation area because of the law. So some of the location of the geothermal and also the hydro. So we need to clear those kind of the challenges in terms of the regulation. Next. And how then about the investment? This discussion is talking about the financing. So from time to time, the implementation of the renewable energy in terms of the investment from 2016 to 2020. Yes, the lowest was last year. The realization is 1.36 billion US dollar. It is the lowest, but because of the pandemic, I think for me, even it is excellent. Yeah, we can do some projects in that very difficult situation, coming from geothermal energy, 700 million US dollar, and coming from hydro, and mostly coming from hydro, almost 500 million US dollar, and a small amount goes to energy conservation and for bioenergy. But others, in 2019, 2017, we were very close to 2 billion US dollar for the investment. And we are targeting this year also to have 2.2 billion for the investment. And it will be from the hydro, solar energy, and almost the same number with last year will be from geothermal project. So this is the our target for 2021. So we'll have the target for 1 gigawatt in terms of electricity, and we'll have reinvestment of 2.2 billion, and we'll add more in terms of the biofuel. Biofuel this year targeted to distributed up to 9.2 million kiloliter. So it's combined together, then we'll have probably this year the target of the primary energy mix will reach around 13%. Next. How then we do the program for electricity? As I mentioned, the target is to have 1 gigawatt. And I mentioned already also that the condition for electricity is in the excess supply. So then how do we put the new renewable energy into the grid. PLN doesn't need the new electricity because they are also in the situation of the excess supply. So we do, for example, the first is to do the substitution of the primary or the final energy they use in the engine. For example, we introduce B30. We are doing the research to increase from B30 to B40 or B50. B30 is a biodiesel 30% with the 70% of the diesel fuel. We are doing co-firing to the coal power plant owned by PLN, and even now we are preparing the regulation, the Indonesia regulation actually, to speed up this kind of implementation in all coal-fired power plant. We are also working together with other ministries to develop the RDF utilization. This is coming, this kind of bioenergy coming from municipal solid waste. So we don't need to change the existing technology. What we do is just to change the primary energy. We put more renewable energy. The second is to convert from fossil into renewable energy power generation. You may understand, you may aware that in some area in the islands, remote area, PLN are still using the diesel power plant, or PLTD we call here, or some area with PLTU, with coal-fired power plant. So we are developing a program to do the conversion from the diesel into the renewable energy. This year, it's targeted to have around 225 megawatt will be converted. That number are already in the draft of the RUPTL. So this is already in the good planning with PLN. The third, when we need new demand, then we put more renewable energy. So this is additional renewable energy, put it into the grid. So it follows the demand by focusing on the solar power plant. The other one is, as the additional activities here, we can use also the direct renewable energy. For example, for geothermal, we can use the heat from the process of the agricultural product, and also for biomass, I think we can do also the drying. We can see in the rice mill, for example, they do the process of drying using the rice husk for the heat. The other two programs, which is this one is also, those two are also very important for the energy transition, are to promote the electric vehicle, and the other one is to do the energy efficiency. Next. So it's about the landscape for financing of renewable energy. I think from time to time, there are always some initiative coming from the stakeholders, coming from the banking, coming from the ministries. Currently, we have so-called Indonesia Climate Change Trust Fund. It is created by the Ministry of Bappenas, with the support coming from ADB, European Investment Bank, the World Bank, and also others in the form of the grant of loan. Last year, it was also introduced the SDG Indonesian one by the Ministry of Finance. So it is also managed by PT SMI, so far I know. So with at least 4 pillars: to develop the facilities, to reduce the risk, financing facilities, and also for the equity. So there are some flexibilities here to support of the renewable energy. The other is the initiative of the public-private partnership. This is also one breakthrough, I think, even though the process is quite long, because we have to do the study, we have to consult with the local government, with the candidate of the consumer and others. At least we need somewhere around 2 years for preparation for the public-private partnership. Commercial banking, I think, to some extent now is much more open into the renewable energy project. OJK here, the authority has provided many support to have more banks also involved in the financing of the green projects. Next. Yeah, there are still many challenges for the financing. We need something a low tariff for the rate for the investment, and also in relation with, I think this is happen in any kind of the project, the collateral requirement. I think this is normal and common. We still have BUT for the projects, and in relation with the transaction cost, and also a local content requirement. Well, it touches also into the issue of the permit and licensing, which is not only the situation of the project of renewable energy, but I think those are also happening in others. Yeah. Next. So then what we do to resolve the challenges, in particular for us here in the ministry, is to do the good regulation. So now we have been prepared the president's regulation on the tariff. So it is already discussed with all ministries, and now it's in the final process within the presidential office. Currently, I am in the discussion with the Ministry of Finance. Next. What is regulated in the draft of the president's regulation? Well, there are some aspects, for example, the feed-in tariff. We use 2 staging tariff here without escalation pace. So there will be a stable tariff on this part. The first will be higher, and then in the second stage will be reduced. So we do understand that the investment has to be returned back within some years, the payback period. So we provide more in beginning and then reduce at this second stage. We have a feed-in tariff for the scale up to 5 megawatt. We have selling price mechanism from capacity up beyond 5 megawatt. And then we are opening also the mechanism for the agreement price. This is negotiation directly with the PLN. So coming from hydropower plant picker, for example, and also for others that are not defined yet in the selling price and also in the feed-in tariff. So we will do the review for every 3 years. So geothermal, hydro, solar, wind, any type of the bioenergy, biomass, biogas. I think those are included already in the draft for the feed-in tariff in the presidential regulation. Next. In addition to the tariff, we put also the kind of the support. That's why it is in the level of the presidential regulation. It's not in the level of the ministerial regulation. We have already for the ministerial, and we put some regulation here, the mechanism, for example, for Ministry of Finance to provide the fiscal and non-fiscal incentives, provide the compensation to the PLN if the purchase price of the PA is higher than the BPP, higher than local production cost, and also from Ministry of State-owned enterprise, for example, we would like to have that the performance indicator for PLN or for others renewable energy companies put the progress of renewable energy. And for other, for example, for Ministry of Industry, to develop the industry here, to develop the national productions, to determine the import quotas for those components that are still being imported. And Ministry of Public Works and Housing, this is also very important for us for the location. Ministry of Home Affairs, this is in relation with regional government. Next. I think for last, so again, I would like to thanks to PGCI for providing me with the update, with the opportunity to share. But we are still committed to achieve the target of renewable energy and also the target of the Paris Agreement. So we will use more renewable energy that economically is already competitive with the fossil fuel. So I think that's all. Thank you for your kind attention. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Dr. Insinyur Dadan Kusdana, MSc, for the keynote speech. Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue this webinar, let me introduce our moderator for today's webinar. This is Erika Andi. She is Energy Finance Analyst at IEFA. Next, I will hand over this webinar to Mrs. Erika. Mrs. Erika, the time is yours.
Thank you. Hello all, good afternoon. Selamat siang menuju sore bagi yang sedang berada di Jakarta dan sekitarnya, dan good evening to Melissa who is joining us all the way from Boston. Kindly, it's approximately 1 or 2 p.m. in your zone time, isn't it? So thank you very much for agreeing to talk in this webinar despite the inconvenient time. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Semoga kita semua dalam keadaan sehat dan selalu berada di bawah lindungan Tuhan Yang Maha Esa. Let me introduce myself. My name is Erika Hamdi. I am an energy finance analyst in the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis. It's IEFA for short, and I will be your host for this afternoon. And as time is ticking, I think we should just start the session. First, let me welcome you, our distinguished panelists, to this Energy Talk series, the 7th series this afternoon. Melissa Brown, Florian Kitt, and Pak Iketut Alam Wangsa Wijaya, who will all be sharing their views about the overview of sustainable energy financing challenges and opportunities. Sebelumnya saya mohon maaf dahulu karena di sini ada 2 panelis yang tidak fasih berbahasa Indonesia, maka saya akan meng-host acara ini dalam bahasa Inggris ya, teman-teman. Hi Melissa and Florian, I will host the webinar in English and to cater to your needs, and if there are any questions or comments in bahasa, I will try to translate them to you. Without further ado, we will start with our 3 distinctive panelist presentations, starting with Ms. Melissa Brown. So she is the IEFA's Director of Energy Finance Study, particularly in the Asia region. She has a long track record as a security analyst and has been in the ESG investors community for a long time. And as you may know, she is a colleague of mine in IEFA and a much respected mentor for myself. Melissa, the floor is yours.
Good. Well, thank you so much. And I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to speak to everyone today. This is a topic that is of great importance, really, not just in the context of Indonesia, but certainly in terms of the way we see the transition to a greater mix of renewable energy taking shape globally. I do have a PowerPoint, so if you don't mind, I'm going to bring that up now, and hopefully we can go from here. Let's see. And bear with me for a moment just while I organize my screen a little bit. First and foremost, I just want to give you a little bit of background on IEFA so you have some understanding of the perspective from which I'm speaking today. IEFA is a public interest think tank. We cover energy transition in markets globally. I have the benefit, in addition to working with Ulrika, I have a really diverse set of colleagues, more than 35 actually, spreading from North America into Europe, into Asia. And in the context of Asia, we're very fortunate to have a team that is on the ground in Australia, in India, in Indonesia, Vietnam, the Philippines, Hong Kong. And it gives us an opportunity to look at how energy transition is playing out globally. And that means that we have a very specific focus, not just on finance, but also on evolving market structures to support the energy transition. And most recently, we have really sharpened our focus on new financing strategies, including all of the issues that we'll be talking about today. So let me just dive into the topic, because when we talk about sustainable finance at this stage of the game, it is in a very focused way a discussion of new instruments and essentially a development of a new asset class. Now, for many of us, that's really the phrase that always comes to mind is green bonds. But it's very important to stress the trends that we're seeing connect in a very rich way to trends that we've been seeing in equity markets and more recently in fixed income markets over really the last decade. And the principal trend here is the rise of what's called ESG investing. And to express that in a very simple way, the easiest way to think about ESG investing is a transition to the point where investors, both active investors and index or passive investors, as they invest, are taking into account environmental, social, and governance fundamentals, just as they are looking at financial fundamentals, questions of asset allocation, sector performance, country market performance. Investors now are also being asked by their investors to look very carefully at new risks and new opportunities that relate to energy transition, very difficult economic problems and social problems that have resulted obviously from COVID, and a broad range of governance issues that relate to how governments, companies, and investors themselves analyze and respond to the types of problems that can really reshape markets. So the first big driver that we see here for sustainable finance is the big rise of ESG investing. And what has then evolved, of course, is the thing that I, as a finance person, am always the most excited about, which is the opportunity for significant innovation. So let me draw your attention to the chart that's on your left that will simply give you a sense of the speed at which the sustainability-linked bond market has begun to develop. Now, this is a really lovely curve. It gives you a sense of how rapidly we've seen dramatic growth in 2020, despite all of the economic risks and the social risks that really ricocheted through global markets. As a result of low interest rates, we saw continued strong growth in fixed income issuance, and that was just as true in the sustainability-linked debt market as well. Now, there's one trend I want to also highlight for you. If you look from left to right, you'll notice that, what was first an orange highlight then begins to be more diversified with green bonds growing. So we've gone from a period in 2012 where there were green loans to a period where it was a much more capital market transaction where we saw companies issuing green bonds. But the big new trend that has begun to evolve, and you'll see it really accounts for much of the growth in sustainability-linked bond issuance in 2020, was the shift toward sustainability bonds. And sustainability or sustainability-linked debt is a little bit more diverse. And I think the concept I'd like to start you with is that green bonds typically are project-linked bonds. So these are big issuers, large corporates, state-owned enterprises that are going to the market and seeking to raise funds for specific green projects. And that is still most of the funding that we saw in 2020. But the new trend that is very significant and top highlighted with the purple are sustainability-linked bonds. Now, those do not need to be just linked to green or environmentally linked projects. Sustainability-linked bonds create a contract between the borrower and the lender that's more nuanced and much, much more innovative. And what the issuer says is, we are going to invest in a way that we will be meeting certain key performance indicators that we think are valued in the market and that relate to the process of energy transition. It gives investors an opportunity to express a real preference for performance against transparent targets. It gives an issuer an opportunity to express their own strategy view on the best way to transition their company and to put funding to work to achieve transparent goals. The second trend I want to highlight for you is really made very clear in the pie chart on the right, which is, who are the big issuers? You know, where is really home base for this market? And in this instance, it's important to note that Europe is really the dominant player. We're seeing more diversification now than we did. And Europe plays a very significant role for an important reason. And that reason is simply that ESG investing, a lot of these strategies and the commitment from top to bottom, from the largest pension funds, governments, sovereign wealth funds, down into asset managers and down into retail investors, has been much more aligned in a European context for a longer period of time. So the Europeans really deserve our thanks and a lot of the credit for having kick-started the sustainability-linked bond market. Now, we've seen rapid uptake and real growth over the last 5 years. The North Americans are in, and certainly in an Asian Pacific context, you should be aware of the fact that the most rapidly growing green bond market is in China. An important additional group, and Florian, I'm sure, can speak to this, are the supranationals and the development finance institutions as well. But that's the broad landscape of where this market is. Now let me bring this a little closer to home, and I'm going to work through a quick sequence of talking about what the sustainable finance market looks like from the perspective of issuers, from the perspective of market developments we're seeing, and then I'm also going to talk a little bit about how investors look at it. But to issuers first, and I think that's important to start there, because our discussion today is, how does the sustainable finance market and the green bond market have relevance to Indonesia and to some of the biggest players in the Indonesian market who would hope to be issuers? So let's talk a little bit about the market drivers, because they do relate to the fundamentals of fixed income. So what fundamentals should you be watching? First and foremost, debt has always been the funding tool of choice in Asian markets. North America historically was more equity focused. Asia, growth capital has historically always come from banks and the debt capital markets. Now, the fundamental link here is strong because countries like Indonesia and many other countries in Southeast Asia are real growth markets, and therefore, as long as the economic fundamentals are robust, they're of real interest. So issuers have the ability to really meet investors, and if the pricing is right, we've got a number of seasoned investors and seasoned issuers who have been able to come together. The focus in recent years, obviously, is some of the opportunity around energy transition. And quite tragically, in 2020, there was a real focus in terms of the way that sustainable finance could provide a response to the many new needs injected into economic management as a result of COVID. Now, the sustainable energy solutions have been a real driver in Asian markets in terms of opening up opportunities for sustainable finance. A number of the leading Asian power companies that have renewables and have been able to tap into this market have been coming to the market early in many instances. So CLP Holdings in Hong Kong, recent entrant into renewables out of the Philippines, AC Energy, important private equity funds that are infrastructure investors in renewables like Vina have been able to go to the green bond market. And in North Asia, you see a similar focus across a range of industries, not just the power sector, but even companies like Hyundai Motor have been going to the market for green bond funding. We've got a lot of activity, of course, from the development finance institutions, and I'll leave it to Florian to give you some more color on that. But it's very much a part of the mandate of the World Bank, of ADB, of the IFC, and other players to work in areas where finance can really provide innovative solutions for significant issuers. And in the meantime, investors are always in there because we're looking globally at a low interest rate environment. So any opportunities for a greater yield and innovative financing tools attracts attention. But there are, of course, some strategic challenges. While a number of companies, a number of issuers have been able to tap the green bond market, it's important to say that not all of the early movers have ended up being perceived as being leaders in the way they've approached the green bond market. Seasoned issuers that have a solid credit rating oftentimes can come up with projects, but that doesn't mean that each and every one of their bond issues have been perceived as being really high quality green bonds. I should also stress that this is a market that is evolving rapidly, but by the same token, it's a market that is really taking shape, and it is taking shape through new standards, new frameworks, new taxonomies, many of which have a region-specific flavor. There's been a lot of activity backed by governments in Asia over the last 3 years. As countries have tried to define what are the standards that they will apply to sustainability-linked bonds. And that's also resulted in, at times, a little less aspiration than I think some investors would like to see. It's tremendously important to not just meet minimum standards, but to anticipate the nature of this market and how it will develop. And finally, there is inevitably a bit of pressure on issuers as they think about how to approach the market. Do they take their time, go step by step, try to build a profile, build credibility before issuing in an ambitious way? Or do you simply bundle up a number of projects and say, these are green, we're going, and hope that your standing in the marketplace will be sufficient? Why do these issues matter? These issues matter because both for the intermediaries, the banks, for the issuers, and for that matter, for investors, we're looking at a new market, and a market that does not yet have a fully recognized definition of what's a really good, greener, sustainable bond and what is actually a disappointing one. Now that creates a lot of opportunity for innovation, but it also can mean that you can have mismatches in expectations. So let me drill down into that issue a little bit. So let's talk about how this market, this ecosystem, if you will, for sustainable finance is developing. Now, one of the most complex things right now is that we have a number of seasoned issuers around the Asian region who are eager to work with green and sustainable linked bonds. But not all of them have the perfect track record to do that. So at the top, you'll notice left and right, I've got a chart that references KEPCO, Korea Electric Power Company, which recently issued a green bond at IEFA that we analyzed. And we found some interesting and challenging points with KEPCO's experience. So first, let me say that this was a bond that was successfully issued. But we also found that when we looked at who the investors were that had subscribed to the bond and that had continued to hold it, it was not a high quality group of sustainable investors. It was certainly not the lead pack of ESG investors. So the bond got done, but it wasn't the type of bond issue that was going to set a benchmark for KEPCO, that really announced to the market that KEPCO was beginning to position itself as a seasoned issuer to work with sustainability-focused investors. And there are a couple of reasons why. Although KEPCO is beginning to transition domestically, they still don't have a very clear story to tell. Their existing generating mix is heavily weighted in the direction of fossil fuels. They have a large component of their energy mix that comes from gas. There's still a debate amongst green-focused investors on the role that gas plays. It's perceived, generally speaking, as being cleaner than fossil fuels and coal, but it is not necessarily perceived fully as being a clean transition fuel. In the meantime, KEPCO is only just beginning to do the work necessary to integrate renewables in a more dynamic way into the market. So they had really a bit of a challenge on that side of the equation. But the biggest problem they faced with investors was on the quality of their ESG reporting and the fact that in recent years, they've continued to be an active investor and oftentimes the catalytic investor in new coal projects overseas and specifically in emerging markets. And that's what stripped out the highest quality group of ESG investors. Now, second point that I'd like to draw your attention to is as we think about this evolving ecosystem and the way that investors are looking at sustainability issues in their bond portfolios now, the focus isn't just on an issuer like KEPCO, but oftentimes there's a new focus being brought to the role of banks and financial intermediaries. And the State Bank of India recently has found itself in a very controversial position because SBI plays a significant role in funding a broad range of companies in the Indian economy. But one of the companies that they have been funding is a company called Adani. And Adani continues, although they are growing very rapidly on renewables, they are still investing in a very significant way in brand new, very significant coal mines. That continues to be a very controversial area for many investors. And although Adani would like to come to the market for green financing, SBI, which is currently lending to Adani, is facing significant pushback from investors who are uncomfortable with that strategy. So I highlight these two examples as a way of really alerting you to the fact that investors, having begun to do much more significant amounts of research into the transition strategies of a broad range of companies across many sectors, are now applying a much, much more discerning lens to the way they think about issuers in general across a range of sectors. Now that raises the bar for potential issuers, but it also will create opportunities as more companies become much more experienced at articulating their transition strategies.
Hi, Melissa. Sorry, can you speed up a little bit? I think you still have 3 more minutes.
Perfect. I want to talk just a little bit about the investor focus. Investors, as I said earlier, are shifting their focus from sustainability-linked bonds to bonds with transition KPIs. If you are investor focused, pay attention to the strategies you see coming out of Europe because the bar is going to continue to rise. Where does PLN fit into this scenario? PLN comes into the sustainability finance market in a privileged position because PLN, along with Indonesia, is an investment grade issuer. But PLN is not without risks because of its significant fossil fuel base. On the plus side, the market is very well aware of PLN's high dependency on the government of India and significant subsidies. On the negative side, PLN as an issuer has no track record with investors in terms of the quality of their ESG transparency or disclosure. that is a very significant challenge. Now, there are one or two points that I'd like to make prior to closing, just about how to think about where some of the opportunities are and where some of the challenges will be. From my perspective, as I look at PLN and its opportunity to take advantage of the sustainable bond market, there are 5 key issues to watch for. One, I think it's tremendously important that PLN, along with its partners in the Indonesian government, takes the time to be strategic. The pressure to consider a green bond that's project-based will be very, very high. But as I said, PLN has no track record in ESG disclosure. And if anything were to go wrong with one of these projects, if they were to not perform, or there were problems in implementation, that would be damaging to PLN's profile over time as a green bond or sustainability-linked bond issuer. So be strategic, build your profile, and anticipate how broad the policy issues are. So on that point, transition matters. The market already knows quite a bit about PLN and the planning processes of the Indonesian government. PLN will have to rely on good performance in the RUPTL and the NDC to build credibility. The reporting capacity will be absolutely critical. As I said earlier, PLN doesn't have any established track record with investors who have demanding questions about emissions, the ability to execute projects, and how problems can be resolved as the company goes through that development process. Another point to keep in mind, although a lot of the discussion, of course, will always be on renewables projects, it's important to keep in mind that one of the most significant opportunities with sustainability-linked bonds actually is focused on grid investments. And I think there's a very good reason for PLN and many of its peers around the region to look at facilitating investments in grid investment that can de-risk the transition toward renewables rather than to focus on small or a somewhat incoherent portfolio of renewables projects. I want to close with one final point. Governance is what really sets the tone in this marketplace. As I've said earlier, it's an evolving market. This is a market that will pay attention to and reward those issuers who would carefully, steadily, with checks and balances and a high degree of transparency. What will be a problem? If there's ever any perception that there is greenwashing, or that issuers are trying to say that something is green when in fact it may not be, that's the type of thing that will be a real setback, even to a quality issuer over time. Thank you for your attention, and I think I will hand back to the rest of the panel. I look forward to hearing what everyone has to say.
Thank you very much, Melissa, for the very deep insight into the current debt capital market trend. We noticed that the big rise of ESG investing, it presents an opportunity for significant innovations, including issuers or new issuers in Indonesia. And we also, I noticed that the sustainability-linked debt is actually increasing, although up to now the green bond markets are still dominating the market. And also the 5 key points to get PLN through as they're planning to issue their first green bond or sustainability-linked bond. And I think there should be someone out of all the participants, the 320 participants in this webinar today from PLN will be listening to this webinar, and as well as the MEMR who are present here. I believe they will try their best to set the tone, so that PLN and other issuers, Indonesian issuers who are looking to tap this market in the near future. To cut things short, I think we should now shift to our second speaker, Mr. Florian Kidd. He is the ADB's energy specialist, who I believe has been involved in a number of transactions with PLN in the last couple of years. Florian, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. Unfortunately, I don't have the ability to, now I can start my video, and hopefully you can all see me. So good afternoon again, and well, good night or good morning to the United States and to Melissa Brown. Good seeing you here. First of all, thank you, and very interesting presentations from Pak Dadan, as well as Melissa. I fear I already have to disappoint in the beginning, as I won't be speaking about everything that Melissa outlined. I've have a bit of a more overview presentation, also going back into why we're talking about this. And I'm mirroring some of Pak Dadan's points and will try to move through them quickly. First of all, why are we actually talking about renewables and renewable financing? First, it's a clear government policy and PLN's new strategy to seek greater renewable investments. First of all, to meet international commitments that Indonesia made via the nationally determined contribution at the UNFCCC level, as well as in already long-standing policies and plans such as the National Energy Policy, the latest RPJMN, the Medium-Term Development Plan, as well as the General Energy Plan. There are also other, I think, factors that contribute to that currently, and that Melissa alluded to, global financing trends. As we're currently seeing, financing institutions from the multilaterals to the bilaterals to increasingly also the private sector shy away from coal. Financing is very clearly shifting to what Melissa introduced as the ESG agenda. As Melissa also outlined, PLN has heard the sign of the times and has issued last year the statement of intent for a sustainable financing framework, which is supposed to underlie its first sustainable bond issuance. We're currently working very closely with PLN on this, and also had very close discussions with IEFA on the points that Melissa made. And these are obviously very important, not just for PLN, but for Indonesia as a still fossil fuel dominated country as a whole. We do also think, and I think that speaks to the current pandemic situation in which we're all in, not just privately, but also on a macro level, which means dwindling funds and budgets on the state, but also on the company level, that renewable energy can really help provide employment benefits post-crisis. As on a general calculation, renewable energy provides more employment and more, especially long-lasting jobs than fossils. Finally, and I will outline that point a bit more in the next slide, it also really is a very important issue increasingly for Indonesia's attractiveness as an investment destination. Global manufacturers such as the Nikes, the Unilevers, Danone and others are really committing to reducing their carbon footprints or even going zero carbon in a certain time frame. Countries are also doing that. The EU is just talking about an EU carbon border adjustment mechanism. So this means that Indonesia, if it wants to continue to attract investment, and not just in renewable energy, but into the wider economy, will have to really green the economy to keep some of the manufacturing, but also of the new investments inside this country. Global pressures, as I noted, means Indonesia really faces already a loss of competitiveness, for example, vis-a-vis other still strong coal consumers, but very strong competitors in the regional FDI game, such as Vietnam or Thailand. Indonesia's top FDI currently comes, first of all, from Singapore, which has a national determined contribution to peak carbon around 2030, and China, which also has peak carbon, and NDC and peak carbon targets, as well as carbon neutrality, Japan and Korea. So a lot, I think, will depend on how the way and how what Pagadan outlined, this transition can be jump-started and intensified. And I think the renewable energy purpose for new tariff schemes is a very good and strong way forward that would set a new path. And thank you, Pagadan, for outlining that. It was with great interest that we listened to your presentation and to the content of this really important piece of legislation. I wanted to mirror what Park Daran said and ask at the same time maybe TKE to provide me their numbers, because we found different ones. We have about the same growth up to now in renewable energy, but we have a higher level in 2015. But overall, we do think that RE capacity has been growing too slow, especially towards the government's own targets, but also having in mind the transition that we're currently seeing in the world and the impacts on especially macroeconomic and real economy investments by foreign investors and companies. So in that view, it's really high time to do more. We also nearly agree with Pak Dadan on the untapped resource potential that Indonesia has in renewable energy, which should allow the country to really jumpstart investments on a large scale. However, currently, only 1% of Indonesia's estimated potential of 699 gigawatts are used. Let me just make a caveat on the potential, that this is very much theoretical. This is also why we're differing from Pak Dadan's numbers in this slide, because some of this, or probably even not just a minor part, but up to 30% might not be exploitable, at least at this time. Ocean energy, as Pak Dadan mentioned, is one of the best examples at the current state of technology. But a lot of geothermal also is due to the location, inaccessibility, or, for example, cultural and religious hurdles to exploit some of the resources there. We also would want to note that we've also think that one of the reasons that renewables grew slower than in the rest of the world, especially solar PV, is that costs for new solar we first wanted to note that the costs for new solar are really below the fuel costs of existing gas and coal generation currently. So for Indonesia, it's a big opportunity to move towards renewables. And you see both the wind and solar prices on average there, as well as the recent Malaysian solar prices in comparison to the existing Indonesian generation costs for coal and gas. We've included the assumptions of a cap and trade scheme, which obviously would add to the financing discussion, and it would make the fossil fuels more expensive and the renewables even more cost competitive. The way I started was in Indonesia, we still see a lot of leeway to lower prices, given the higher cost due to higher local cost of financing and the higher investment costs in Indonesia. So we're currently still seeing an increase in Indonesian solar costs by up to 80%. And this obviously has its roots in a number of factors. The first is higher country and off-taker PLN risk. Less access to guarantees and subsidies, which are very much part of the financing discussion, as well as the need to compensate for higher marketing and development costs due to small and infrequent procurements in Indonesia, which speaks to the low number of projects, which I will detail later on. The final point, and I will also outline that in more detail, is that higher costs for a lot of renewables in Indonesia arise from a mix of a lack of economies of scale because of the low level of penetration that goes especially for the new variable renewable energies such as wind and solar, and high local content requirements. And in addition to the high local content requirements, an inability of the country to currently produce these technologies. So that all increases the cost of projects, but it also increases the cost of financing. And you have a bit of comparisons to other countries and regions, especially the Gulf, as well as the rest of the world in this slide. I wanted to now come a bit to the financing thing. Debate, which I don't see as the crucial part holding back the development of renewable energy in Indonesia at present. I would like first to note, because I do think that we have a lot of private sector developers in here, and its generation is not only developed by PLN in Indonesia, but especially renewables have been spearheaded by private investors, is that there's obviously corporate financing. Corporate financing is currently expensive in Indonesia, and the US dollar market is not very developed. So this obviously is a constraint in that it is difficult, especially for small investors, to access financing. But for the large companies, I don't think that corporate financing for renewable energy should hold back investments at present and can be accessed. The second, obviously, is, and I'm from a multilateral institution, the Asian Development Bank, is multilateral financing, which comes at concessional rates if it's provided for sovereign loans, meaning either for the government or state-owned enterprises on the state level, such as PLN. There's also on the multilateral side the opportunity to provide, so to say, co-financing or partial financing to the corporate financing or project financing for renewable energy projects. We can actually take maximum 25% of the development cost of a project and join as a financier with the project sponsors. We've done so in a number of projects, and I will outline that on a later slide. And Melissa has already spoken very detailed to the question of green finance and bonds. And yes, that is obviously a landscape and a playing field that is developing very rapidly. There is, as Pak Dadan also outlined in his slide, the Sustainable Development Goal 1 Fund, which is co-funded by the ADB, which is housed at PTSMI, and which can finance not only central level state-owned enterprises, but also local, so subnational projects, which is actually an add-on for us. So we're using what we call a financial intermediary loan to provide financing to Ministry of Finance, to PTSMI, and then on to the identified projects. Obviously, this raises costs slightly, as SMI has a different financing structure than, for example, the ADB. The second one are green bonds, sustainable bonds, transition bonds, and other possibilities that are currently becoming more and more used. Although the green bond, sustainable bond, as well as transition bond market in Asia is really still comparatively very small. The ADB launched a sustainable bond in Thailand last year, upon which example we're currently working with PLN to look further into that. I already saw a question in the Q&A part where I think Vinny asked where green bonds would be accessible. Green bonds is a market instrument. So it is based, as Melissa, I think, very elaborately explained, on a list of projects that then are brought to market investors, and that's mostly large investors, such as even the ADB itself and others, that then would buy these bonds upon a coupon rate for a rate of return. Other green finance or other financial components of the current financing environment in Indonesia for renewable energy are obviously the tax incentives are provided by the Ministry of Finance, which haven't been used very widely, which is always a surprise to us, but it might be that either access is too difficult or it's really the problem of the smaller scale of projects, that it doesn't pay enough to avail themselves, given the work to be done and documents to be filled to really get these tax incentives and credits. The second is project development funding and credit enhancements, which are available via the SDG 1 fund and also more widely via PTSMI itself. I wanted to note at this point, there is also a geothermal risk mitigation fund provided by our colleagues from the World Bank in partnership with Ministry of Finance and PTSMI to really and specifically de-risk geothermal development in Indonesia. Obviously, one of the key resources in the country where Indonesia could be a world leader, and if developments continue as Pak Dadan outlined them in terms of the investment pipeline, also will probably very soon overtake the United States as a leading generating country for renewable energy. Finally, I would like to note the already one could say in ESG terms, old financing way of carbon financing, which Indonesia has followed for a long time in terms of developing voluntary markets. This is still ongoing, and there is a carbon finance initiative under the new Environmental Protection Fund. And I think this is led by Kemenkeu Perekonomian, which is having the lead. PLN is also very much looking at ways to access and prepare for carbon financing. And that especially, as Melissa mentioned, in terms of monitoring, reporting, and verification, which really lies at the heart of the ESG, green, social, and sustainable financing agenda, the ability for all of us to ensure that what we're financing is in fact contributing to climate mitigation. On this slide, I would like to end. While we do see a comprehensive financing environment in Indonesia emerging with already a lot of components for dedicated renewable energy financing, what is lacking is project financing in general. That's really the one thing that is lacking for any power project, whether it be fossil or renewable, and also for a lot of other investment projects in other sectors, be it agriculture, water, or transport. There is from the state-owned bank side, but also from the private bank side, no history or experience with real project finance. So that would really be a step forward, and also allow smaller projects to be financed by the existing banks in Indonesia, and not on the basis of just simply the corporate value and performance, but on project value and performance as well. That would make renewable financing and financing individual projects much easier. Now, on the ADB side, we've actually financed a lot, and we're, I think, one of the larger financiers on renewable energy in Indonesia. Overall, ADB has funded 50% of all wind, which, to be honest, sounds better than it is, I would say, because there are only 2 large-scale wind projects. And we're glad to have been able to fund Jeneponto Wind, which is also currently run by Vina Energy, as Melissa noted them before. We've financed a lot of geothermal, Muara Laborantau Didap, Sarula, as well as Tieng 2 and Patua 2, which are currently underway. And we have also funded, or in the process of funding, solar PV in Lombok and Likupang. Under our loans with PLN, we're also helping PLN to add small-scale renewable generation in the eastern part of Indonesia. And we're financing over a 6-year timeframe of what we call a results-based loan, about 88 megawatt hours of solar generation and small hydro generation annually for PLN, against which we would disperse about $50 million. Let me note that most of these projects, especially Sarula, Muara Laborantau, Dedap, Jeneponto, and Lombok, were signed before 2017 and are all private sector led. That means these are projects that really private sector companies have developed. They are IPPs with PPAs, and ADB came in with max 25% financing.
Hi, Florian.
Yes,
Sorry,
how much time do I have?
Well, actually, you ran out of time, but I'll give you another 1 minute.
1 minute. Okay, I'll try to be very quick then.
Thank you.
Just to say that since then, we have not had much projects. The first one since 2017 is Dieng Patua 2, which is a sovereign loan to Geodipa. Now, let me move quickly. That has to do with a lot of roadblocks for renewables. The first one that we've seen is policy inconsistency from the government side. And I think especially in 2017 and 18, we had like a couple of steps backward from the regulatory side, which really held up project development. It also goes to planning problems in especially the RUPTL over the last couple of years. And we hope that the new RUPTL, which we're waiting eagerly, will have a clearer way forward on that. In that, I would just briefly note, let me move to the planning stage. That really with the RUPTL, if that is fixed and investors have a better sense of what will be hooked on, and Pak Dadan noted the overcapacity currently in Indonesia, then it will be much easier to prepare financing and be ready with financing when the projects should come online, both from, I think, the private sector side, but also from the multilateral side. For us, it takes at least a year to develop a project and to get financing ready. We're not the fastest institution in the world. Let me end on the slide how to accelerate. I think there would really need to be a concerted effort following the renewable energy tariff regulation mentioned by Pak Dadan to start with the electricity governance on the regulatory side, transparency and more public participation, and then really on planning, economic system planning, more de-risking, a relaxation of local content rules, and increased and easier loan subsidies and credit enhancements. As I think Elrica is very keen for me to stop, I'll end here and would be happy to discuss this in more detail.
Thank you, Florian. Sorry to rush you, but the time is ticking.
That's okay.
Okay, so thank you very much for your detailed insight and your views on the challenges and roadblocks of financing renewables in Indonesia. But one thing that I noticed specifically is your statement about local market for corporate financing is not very much developed in Indonesia, which I think is the opposite of what has happened in Vietnam instead. I mean, Vietnam, with the boost of wind and solar energy, a lot of the financing came from a local bank. So to answer this, maybe we will give the stage to our last speaker of the day, Pak Iketut Alam Wangsawijaya. He is the head of transaction banking of PT BCA currently. Pak Ketut, please do share your views and your experience, as BCA is one of the most prominent local financier in Indonesia. The floor is yours. The time is 20 minutes, ya, Pak.
Okay. Thank you, Erika. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and also to Pak Dadan, Pak Edi Widiono, Melissa, and Florian, and also other participants that might be in the different zone. So good night and good morning. So I would like to share in this session regarding the BCA position as a bank and also the private sector, and also the bank who has a large of consumer base, and how to support our strength into sustainable energy.
Pak, sorry, can you put it in a full screen mode? Yes, that one. Thank you.
Sorry. Is it done?
Not yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Erika. So a little bit the story about BCA today. BCA is one of the private banks in Indonesia who has capability in transaction banking, one of the leading in transaction banking. We serve more than 30 million transactions per day, and we do have like more than 21 million customers, and we serve various segments, start from the corporate side and also the individual customers in the mass segment. So what the interesting about BCA? BCA is one of the private bank in the context of sustainable energy. We can see as a bank who facilitate various customers, and as a private sectors who try to play roles to supporting a government's initiatives, and also a bank who has a customer base both in individual and corporate sectors. So a bit about BCA. One of the success story of BCA is we did digital transformation since back a few years ago, and now we reach more than 60% are digital natives. So we also have more than 1,500 e-commerce with more than 5.8 billion suppliers. So we can imagine that states that we can play around to support the initiative in terms of sustainable energy. This is one of the digital journey that we try to share. Start from 1987. We do have like a product, or one of the famous product is the saving product. It's a Tahapan BCA. It's a paper base, but we transform into non-paper base. So where do we go along with this journey is we go into less and less paper. By how? By implementing digital transformation strategy. We start with providing the internet banking in ATM first. So we shift the behavior of customers. Instead of going to the branch, they can go to the nearest location of the ATM. And then we shift also people doing transaction through internet and mobile banking, with the expectation also to be more environmentally friendly because less consumption on the solar energy. And then we go now into mobile and building behavior where customers can do transaction by themselves in various customer touch point, either branches, either mobile banking, internet banking, and also the POS. And as one of the leading transaction banking, we also transform the way customer doing transaction to less and less paper. So we provide like the QR Indonesian system along with the government, and we transform all the capabilities to sell the product through our digital apps. For instance, if previously two panelists talking about the bonds, and Welma is one of the applications that sell one of the products to the mass segment. And also we create some innovation to change the behavior of the people, sharing like money and reducing less paper in giving the money through features like bagi-bagi, because in Chinese tradition, which exists in Indonesia, like ang pao or maybe lebaran for Muslim is giving money to relatives, we can replace it electronically. So what we can learn from this journey is if we have a dream to transform the people's behavior, we can start to educate and introduce consistently what kind of a lifestyle they would like to introduce to the people. So at this moment, we can shift 98% of the transaction is through electronic channel. So less than 2% transaction happen in branches. So can you imagine the effect of the consumption of the energy itself, which mostly related to the fuel energy right now, because the mobility, most people maybe go to buy motorcycle or a car, it's reduced by itself because the urgency going to the branch is less and less. So this is one of the example. Also, we as a bank giving the example to our business partner and also to our customer how to build a sustainable office building. This is one of the example where the building that's one of the example how we support the sustainable energy, and how we also be supported by the behavior of our staff in daily life. Because for example, in electricity consumption in our building, during the breaks, and also at 6 p.m. is automatically off for the LED lights, and also we apply the aircon inverter, and we also we monitor the building electricity. For water, we're using technology of water recycling and water saving campaigns, and installing water maintenance and eco washers. For plastic, for instance, for plastic waste and emission, we encourage our staff bring their own tumbler, so we consume less and less mineral water in the plastic. So we also applying solar panel in our offices. It start to be multiplicated in other location, and also providing bus shuttle, so the consumption of fuel solar will be less and less. And we always consistently improve the awareness and implement the values of BCA ethics, which one of the element is also put on the top priority, how we can support the environment issues in this case. And
Pak Ketut, sorry,
yes,
I think you have another 1 minute.
Okay, so this is the result. We reduce the consumption of the electricity throughout 66 office, and we covering the loans, like mentioned before, with 127 trillion. And also from the consumer side, previously finance is already discussed previously by two panels, and also we support to the individual customers. We support all the products who support the partnership with APW Solar, to introduce to the people how they can implement solar panel in their homes, and we support with various marketing support in terms of the communication and the education to the broader markets. And we put also gimmick for them, and we make it affordable to our installment plan. So price should not be the issue anymore. So maybe we can collaborate more with other institutions who has this kind of product, so we can support the sustainable energy in the long term. I think that's all from my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pak Ketut, for sharing your views and experience. And I'm very glad to see that BCA is already moving into the rooftop solar for consumers. And I hope there are a lot of takes for the special low interest program of BCA, or at least a better loan structure for the consumer who wants to install solar rooftop on their houses. Can I get all the three panelists to turn on the video so that we can start the question and answer sessions? Thank you. Hi, welcome back, Melissa, Florian, and Pak Ketut. Can you please turn on the video as well? Thank you. All right, so we have a few questions in the Q&A box. I'll probably, okay, so actually there's a question for Pak Dadan. Pak Dadan, masih di sana, Pak? Has Pak Dadan left the session already?
Sorry, Bu, Pak Dadan is another meeting. So
okay.
If there is any question goes to him, I will try to answer it. Thank you.
Oke, Pak. Pak Krisnawan ya berarti ya. Ini ada pertanyaan dari Bagus Kuncoro. Perkenalkan, nama saya Bagus Kuncoro Hadi, mahasiswa Unsir. Pertanyaannya, bagaimana rencana pengelolaan energi nasional dan strategi implementasi untuk rencana umum energi nasional lintas sektoral yang katanya dapat menguraikan target energi negara sampai tahun 2050. Jadi ini kayaknya perencanaan secara keseluruhan ya Pak ya. Monggo Pak, bisa dijawab. Pak, Bapak masih on mute.
Sorry, I will try to answer the question from Pak Bagus. Yeah, actually we already have what we call the National Energy Master Plan, and then under this National Energy Master Plan, many related ministries, institutions involved in order to achieve our renewable energy target 23% by 2025, and there is some action under this master plan, what the Minister of Mineral Resources should do, and Ministers of Transport must do. There is already identified. One of the implementation under this National Energy Master Plan is in developing electric vehicles that already launched by the Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources last year. And related minister is also already involved. For example, a Minister of Transport already issued some regulation in order to support modifications of the motor, conventional motor to the electric motors. This is the one of the what you call the involvement of the ministries, related ministries. The other one is other sectors is already identified under the National Energy Master Plan. The other one is the local, the province. Under the Energy Master Plan, there is also obligation of the local government to provide what they call the regional or provincial energy master plan. So through this kind of the master plan, we expected the target for achieving 23% of renewable energy can be achieved. That's my explanation. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak, for the very thorough explanation. I'll probably start from the bottom. I saw an interesting question. I think this is suitable for Melissa to answer. Apart from renewable energy financing, how do financial service institutions or banks view the potential for climate-related risk in non-renewable or fossil energy financing? For example, the potential for stranded assets in the future. What responses have been made to mitigate this risk, either from a multilateral bank perspective or national bank's perspective? So I think this could be answered also by Florian. But I think I'll give it to Melissa first.
Well, I think without question, one of the biggest challenges resulting from energy transition has been for the financial services sector overall. And we've seen a number of very thoughtful responses that have now begun to have practical implications for banks, some of which has to do with the Task Force on Climate-Focused Disclosures. So what's really evolved is an effort driven by bank regulators to say to banks, it's now incumbent upon you to look at your full portfolio of lending activities, to begin assessing how climate risk affects your risk as a bank. Now that risk obviously varies by the nature of the bank. So BCA has a very different risk profile than, say, for example, a bank that predominantly lends to heavy industry. But what the regulators have been asking of banks is to look at climate risks as they would look at any other significant risk to liquidity and credit loss. And it has driven a whole process for a number of the largest banks in the Asian region, and particularly in Southeast Asia, to look at their industry-related risks and the nature of their lending tenor and the types of financial products they've been providing across a range of borrowers. So that's led to a very productive process of really risk adjustment, if you will. And by the same token, it's also begun slowly but surely to result in a refocus. With the rise of sustainable finance, we've now seen a number of banks, in some instances coming from a very low base, beginning to develop teams to look at the question of how can sustainable finance strategies be used to provide funding for positive energy transition activities. So let me give you one example. One of the more dynamic areas of sustainable finance, in addition to sustainability-linked bonds, is the sustainable loan market. And that's a particularly interesting area because it means where you've got banks that have clients that have activities that relate to energy transition, and those activities can be monitored and can be defined in terms of KPIs. In some instances, banks increasingly can act as an intermediary between investors and potential lenders and significant clients who are looking to lend to companies that have activities that they can put up against KPIs that do relate to transition. So one key area that we see, and I take on board Florian's comment earlier about the importance of project finance, but interestingly, one of the trends that we see quite a bit of, not so much in Indonesia, is we see a lot of corporate financing of investments in renewables and other very important energy transition activities. But in some instances now, those corporates are benefiting from sustainable loans. So it's balance sheet banked financing. It's not non-recourse, but it's providing new sources of capital that corporate investors, oftentimes with real local knowledge, can begin to apply to fill funding gaps on renewables and energy transition activities.
Thank you, Melissa. Florian, do you want to probably answer of what kind of responses have been made to mitigate this risk from ADB's perspective?
Well, let me and allow me to first say I fully agree with Melissa. I just would like to add that most likely what you've seen is that the insurance companies have moved first on this because they really have seen the risks much earlier. They don't only insure energy, but they insure weather-related risks and a couple of other risks around the world. So that's where I think the dangers of stranded assets and other items came first to the minds of the CFOs and the people responsible for making money for the companies. They then went down, especially the reinsurers, to the banks and financial institutions and others. They reinsure or insure to note that pricing will go up. Because they are not comfortable anymore to provide some of these insurance guarantees on normal pricing and risk. Then you had the really states and politicians come together, especially in the OECD, with a moratorium. On the question of the stranded assets and from the multilaterals, it's not directly an ADB mandate, but we're very worried, and obviously also for our own portfolios. So that is why under Strategy 2030, ADB is fully moving out of coal financing and has already stopped for a long time financing of any upstream fossil fuels and has only limited financing for midstream. We expect this to intensify, obviously, with a more sustainable focus on our new energy strategy. What we are working on, and I think the realization of the risks associated with stranded assets and also the obviously big holdings still by banks and other investors of fossil fuel assets around the world, is now leading to thoughts, how can we phase out with financial schemes and positive returns, fossil fuels, and turn these assets into renewables. So these are, I think, the new agendas that I see coming forward. Really, I would say based on what I would call the EON experience, where the company has split out basically in quotation marks bad assets, fossil assets, and reinvented itself on more renewable basis. So you can then basically transfer and phase out some of the assets while you're holding shares and interest in some of the new renewable assets that you can finance. I think this is a very important agenda. And I mean, I personally, right, let me say this personally, think the international community has shied away for too long from the question how to finance the phase out of these potentially stranded assets. But it's a very real risk. And I think especially in Indonesia, I'm very concerned because we're seeing new coal coming online in the next 2 years. So whether these plants will be able to finalize their 25 to 30-year lifetime is a big question mark. And we're already seeing the problems of we have oversupply, there are too many projects, but how can we phase out the ones that are clearly inefficient now already? Thank you.
Thank you, Florian, for bringing that up. That is also our concern from IFA. But I think I have a question for Pak Ketut here from Sin Lee Hardy. Will there be any possibilities for Indonesia's banks to accept solar power plants as collateral instead of fixed assets? So I think he's asking on the project financing type. I know in Europe and Australia, there are incentives not only to provide the corporate and large-scale projects, but also incentivize homeowners by listing the brands that are bankable. This will make the projects penetrate much faster.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Erika, for the question. I think BCA is one of the bank who see the sustainable energy is one of the most promising sectors that we should finance. I think we are open to learn new things, how to put the collateral itself, including if in other markets, like in other countries, there will be a practical to put the solar panels as one of the collateral. I think there will be some expertise to confirm on that part as well, because maybe this is about something new and we have to associate with our risk profile, risk appetite. I mean, so in this case, we are open if is there any new expertise to assess on the valuation of the collateral itself. For instance, in 2011, we are assisted by USAID on the skill on how to support as a bank on the project financing or corporate financing itself related to sustainable energy. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Pa, and thank you for being open on that front. There's another question for Melissa and Florian here. So for Melissa, why does PLN, well, I'm not sure if this is your expertise to answer, but so the question is, why does PLN remain wedded to this debt loan backward-looking planning bias in 1 to 2 years after pandemic conditions? And also another question for Melissa and Florian, do you see that local financing sectors have much to boost the RE implementation, or what should government do to increase local banks' probably appetite to fund RE project? Please, whoever wants to answer first.
Sure. Why don't I try to just touch on some of the issues on the question about the debt loan and planning cycle. One of the things that's characteristic of PLN's planning process, and indeed its financing processes, is a scenario where something that's been a good thing has now become a little bit of a bad thing. And the good thing was that Indonesia returned to investment grade status in 2017. So it meant that PLN as a state-owned enterprise was able to access a lot of US dollar debt and the US dollar bond markets in a relatively preferred position. It gave PLN a lot of access to lower cost financing. But then what happens is if you're funding and you have an ongoing funding cycle, it means you're constantly having to go back to the market to refinance. In addition, because PLN was on such a steep curve of adding new capacity, especially new capacity with guaranteed offtake and PPA terms, PLN has found itself locked into a whole scenario that means that PLN has to constantly be addressing the fact that the company has fixed obligations that they have to meet. And during the COVID period in particular, when tariffs came down, it has meant that PLN has had to rely on debt markets and has had to ensure that it could meet financing targets, particularly during a period when low interest rates were prevalent. So you've just really got PLN at this stage of the game essentially on a treadmill. And one of the real tragedies in here is when you look at other markets, and I do think at times it can be a little complex looking at other markets and saying this is a perfect comparison. But one of the things that it has happened is PLN has solved one problem, and it was engineering itself to solve the one problem, which was to have a very significant increase in generating capacity. Unfortunately, that planning process didn't take into account changes in new technology, the importance of also financing grid build out. And so PLN now has a lot more generation, but it still has a relatively unstable system. And it's locked itself into a pattern with debt capital markets that now don't give the company much flexibility to address new technology options in a more flexible way. So essentially, it's a treadmill. PLN is doing the best that it can, but it has limited its options in terms of dealing with transition.
Thank you, Melissa. Florian?
Yes, thank you. I mean, we definitely agree with Melissa's take on the history and, as you say, treadmill, and also the success that PLN had with the debt financing, which I think has led to an amazing expansion of Indonesia's generation system, where the question is whether that was necessary. I would like to add, instead of repeating that story, is that the one part of the equation that is missing here is that the expansion of generation plus the debt financing from PLN was to go hand in hand with an increase of the electricity tariffs, meaning which would have increased PLN's revenue. So I think one has to very strongly put an eye on that this is, let's say, a condominium between PLN and the government. PLN as a state-owned enterprise that provides the generation acts as a single buyer, and the government that sets the rules, especially on pricing. So I think that's what would have to evolve to get PLN kind of out of that treadmill, or let's say turn down the steps per minute it has to take, and to make that again a sustainable sport, which PLN can then also use to finance the transition. The pandemic obviously has been a big hole and an unexpected once in a lifetime event also for PLN. So this is, I think, why there's also government support needed at this point in time to finance the energy transition. I don't think that we have seen a full energy transition anywhere in the world without government support and without strong government financing. If we look at the beginnings. On the planning side, well, we can't agree more, but again, I would just like to note that we think it's a condominium and we hope that the next RUPTL looks at better. On the second question that you noted, Melissa, I would like to note that yes, obviously local financial institutions have a key role to play in the market. And that is, I think, especially for smaller developers and the absence of project finance in there, the problem why it's very difficult for smaller Indonesian companies to get in on the game, because they don't have the necessary experience or balance sheets to justify the corporate loans. Obviously, the comments from Paketud in there, I think, are very encouraging that BCA is looking at this at a growth market. And Paketud, we would be happy to work with you and also bring you some of our friends and consultants that have worked with BDO in the Philippines, as well as other colleagues to help you, I think, through that agenda and how to provide more loans to, I think, a lot of the companies that are currently looking at the renewable energy market, including the large-scale rooftop solar rather than the retail market. I think that's a growth sector with the change in regulation where you will have a lot of the manufacturings, petaminas, oil and gas, all be very keen to establish ground mounted roof solar. Thank you.
And on that note, Pak Ketut, there's a specific question here from Guna Electro, Desi from Guna Electro. She wanted to know if BCA has a credit for solar powered in industry and household. So I think she's referring to rooftop solar for industry and household.
Yeah, thank you, Erika. And thank you for Florian. It's very nice to meet you here. So I think we can get connected to bring some skills and expertise. And yeah, answering the questions, we have a lot of customer base in terms of commercial and individuals. And I think some programs is already running, for instance, bundling the solar panel into mortgage, because we are also one of the top mortgage player in this country, in Indonesia. So we bundle the solar panel with the mortgage loan. That's one thing for the individual, and also for credit card base, as mentioned earlier. And also maybe for commercial, we can explore. I mean, we can put it as a bundling or a scheme when they are becoming our commercial or SME a client. Yeah, I think we are open for that one.
Okay, thank you. There are still some more questions in the Q&A box, but we have almost neared our limited time, I think. Yes. So I'm sorry for all the questions that are unanswered. We'll probably keep your questions and the event organizer will provide the answers.
And can I respond just to one question? Sorry.
Sure.
Out of a I think someone asked about the possibility of nuclear. It's a topic close to my heart. So if I may, I would just like to note that I would encourage people to read the latest analysis from the German Institute for Economics, DIW. Not the most leftist or renewable focused institute in the world. They're really very conservative economists. Nuclear is the most expensive form of generation that you can put on the ground. There is nothing that costs you more money and you simply do not have the cash. Second, you need a full training program for at least 5 years and you need to produce every year nuclear engineers. Indonesia doesn't have that either. You have a number of problems with earthquakes, volcanoes. The natural hazards are huge. If you look at what happened in Japan and what can happen and the catastrophes also. Third, fourth is that we haven't found any solution to waste of nuclear in over 60 years. I doubt we will find one in the next 20 years, and renewables are way cheaper, easier to install, and don't harm people's lives or the environment. The last point is it's always talked about that nuclear is zero carbon. That's not true. The construction levels of nuclear mean that nuclear is about 25% under coal in terms of carbon emissions. So it's really important not to think this is something that is easy, cheap, and will by itself save the planet. Thank you.
All right, thank you for all right, so we have come to the end of our webinar, and I think due to the time, I think we can only give each panelist 1 minute of closing statement, please. Melissa?
I think first and foremost, I want to thank my other panel members and you know, the host for making this event possible. And Florian, I second all of your comments on nuclear, and I think one of the most important points I would like to leave everyone with is that Energy transition is really a game of incentives. If you want more renewables, you can offer a higher tariff, you can have cheaper finance, or you can make sure that renewables are part of a plan that is going to work, so that renewables developers know that the tariff they are promised, whether it's high or low or in the middle, reflects what they will work toward, and that they will have a reliable level of dispatch. There are many levers you can pull, but you've got to manage the incentives, and that's just as true for the banks providing capital and for the investors. If you can create transparency and align them, you will have a more successful energy transition.
Thank you. Florian?
Thank you. I think
one minute,
thanks.
yeah, Florian.
Yes, thanks to Melissa. I just want to say the time is really now to transition. It's important for the country. The future will hang on that in terms of investments and where you go economically. If you miss the boat now, you might have missed it for a couple of years. So the policies that you do now and the financing will shape the future of Indonesia. The ADB is your bank, you're our member state, 6th largest. We will stay with you through thick and thin. So hopefully we can get on that journey together. Thank you.
Thank you. And Pak Ketut?
Well, I think we are living in the era of the collaboration. I think to make more impactful action, I think BCA is one of the players from the private sectors, and we can encourage our customers to consume the sustainable energy. So if the product can already at the stage of very, very scalable, and then we can help you to make it mass. So it will help you to implement in the broader segment. So hopefully it will support all the initiative to sustain the renewable energy. Thank you.
Thank you for our distinguished panelists on your insights and comments. And also, I'm very much in line with everyone here that we are all for a better and greener and under 2 degree or under 1.5 degree Celsius Earth, because we're all living in the same Earth. So with that note, I would like to end this session, and thank you again. And I'm sorry if there is any wordings or comments that is beyond anyone's mind. So sorry. Can I? Okay. So for the participants, the presentations will be provided in PJTI's website. And yep. Okay. That's it. And we should be. Thank you for the very interesting discussion. Thank you for the panelists, Pak Dadan, Melissa, Florian, and Pak Ketut. And thank you. If you can also, for participant, if you can also fill in the feedback form, which is under the chat box. Thank you all.
And thanks for moderating.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Florian. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you,
all the
Pak.
panelists and the speakers.
Yeah, and thank you for
Thank
the
you so
event
much.
organizers as well. And
thank you, Mrs. Erica, for guiding this Energy Talk webinar today. Thank you to Mr. Dadan Kusdiana and Mr. Edi Widiono for taking their time today. Also to the speakers, Mrs. Melissa Brown, Mr. Florian Kate, and Mr. Ketut, who gave an extraordinary presentation to all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for me to close today's webinar. For those of you who want to rewatch the webinar, we will send the webinar materials and recordings to your email. I'm Anissa, Pemerindo, and PCCI House for the Lead. Thank you for your time and have a great day. See you in the next Energy Talk 8 series. Sampai jumpa. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
audiens yang hadir tadi banyak bertanya dan punya interest yang tinggi mengenai kelistrikan untuk kepulauan. Dan memang mereka pengen tahu sebenarnya di mana batu sandungnya mengapa listrik kepulauan belum bisa berkembang secara sempurna di Indonesia.
Sini kan banyak pertemuan konsultan mechanical electrical, jadinya pertemuan
Halo, selamat sore. Terima kasih dari tim Pamerindo kepada tim PJCI. Terima kasih Mbak Nisma, Pak Anton, Pak Edi.
Udah tinggal kita doang kan?
Iya.
Ya, selamat sore Pak Anton, Mbak Nisma. Kita mau mengucapkan terima kasih kalau masih ada atas kesempatannya kali ini. Kalau masih ada Mbak Novel, juga terima kasih Mbak Novel.
Sama-sama Mbak Lia.
Sama-sama. Halo Mbak, iya juga kasih banyak ya Mbak.
Ya.
Samanya Mbak Nisma. Oke, nanti kita berkontak-kontak lagi via line yang lain ya Mbak. Sambil menunggu karena masih ada partisipan.